Hamish, thank you so much for joining us today. We will kick off the session with having you introduce yourselves, and then we will go into some questions that I have for you. Lensa, why don't we start with you?
Oh, okay. Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Lensa Jote. I'm currently a PhD researcher at University of Leicester. My project focuses mostly around in vitro meat within the nexus of food, water, and energy. But I'm also the co-founder and director of Lenke Space and Water Solutions. We utilize space data to actually help and monitor water quality, but also forecast soil moisture for agricultural purposes. So that's who I am. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. It's going to be really fun to hear your perspective on the mining sector. Maria, why don't you go next?
Thank you. So my name is Maria ARPA and I am the founder of a charity called the Centre for Peaceful Solutions, which hopefully we do what we say on the tin. And I'm particularly interested in dialogue, in the idea that nothing gets done without human relationships. And if we don't pay attention to those relationships, then we're not actually doing anything of any value. We're knocking people out of the way. And so the less you pay attention to a relationship at the start of that relationship, the more you will find that you have to sweep up later on. Or the bigger the battle you'll find yourself in later on. So I'm really interested in the power of dialogue. And I came to this because recently I've been in America and I've met some people in Boone County, West Virginia, who have been kind of the victims, if you like, of the worst of the mining industry, suffering from the whole mountaintop removal. And I intend to work with that community over the summer and beyond in helping them to grieve and heal and rebuild some empowerment. And that's something I'd be interested in talking about as well.
Fantastic. That is excellent. Looking forward to this. Hamish, who are you?
Hi everyone, my name is Hamish A. It's great to hear from my other panelists as well. It's the first time we've met, I think. So I'm a water engineer and I've previously worked in a more technical capacity, a little bit similar to what Lensa was doing in some ways, looking at groundwater resources especially. So there's definitely interaction with mining and materials there. I'm now studying another master's degree in urban ecological planning in Norway, focusing mostly on international development issues. And as part of that, I spent several months in Panaji in Goa, where mining is a very, very controversial topic and has been a sort of by corrupt capital, arguably there. So I'm very interested for the discussion.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Keith.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to join this panel. My background is originated as an electronics engineer. I got involved in risk management over 20 years ago. Perhaps most important from this point of view, I spent 3 years at Lloyd's looking at emerging risk, and that continues to be my focus. Emerging risk, risk management, and decision making. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And you are all joining me in this session because you are not mining specialists. So tell me, what comes to mind when I say mining? And Keith, I'm going to turn to you first.
Sorry, who?
Yeah, you, Keith. You can.
Well, mine's coloured by being a young lad on holidays in Cornwall, seeing the tin mines down in Cornwall. And of course, the message when you get down there is of miners having a hard life, difficult conditions, and sadly quite a shortened life. And of course, as a young boy, that set an impression on me. And of course, in the age of 13 here in the UK, I don't know if you remember, that we had a dispute with the coal miners. And so again, that sort of coloured my thinking about mining. Later on, when I was at Lloyd's, we looked at this more seriously as opportunity. And Sarah Satala did a really good report for us on mining. And of course, that completely changed my view. I saw it much more realistically, but yeah, definitely a non-miner. Thank you.
And Lensa, what's your idea of mining?
Well, I was born and raised in Ethiopia. I'm an Ethiopian. And of course, in Africa, you hear lots of mining, the gold mining, the diamond mining, the coca mining, you name it. And most of the resources are from other African regions. And in the process, you see a lot of young people, that, in fact, even women, that end up losing a lot of young people. And even the labor cost is also rather unmentionable, the held accountability. And you see the profit going not even to reach another African, but outside of the African country, the resources exported elsewhere. And so I grew up looking at these children, looking at communities, particularly Black communities, taking advantage of not only their physical labor, but their resources, their land. So for me, mining is a rather touching subject, I guess, just because I grew up looking at that. Growing up, of course, and being in the science field, you learn a lot what it is and the values it has, but that image never quite lives you.
So the simplest questions are often the most powerful. Would you say that mining is good or bad?
Are you asking me?
I am.
Well, I don't know. I think mining is good or bad, as it is with everything. It depends. That's the best answer to get away. For me, I think we can live without it, or to actually live with it, we have to redefine so many aspects of mining, particularly the definition of it itself. The way I mean, what does mining itself mean? It means the extraction of valuable materials for an economical purposes, translation for profits, right? And so for whose profits are you actually doing it? And when you ask those questions, is it good or is it bad? It depends who you're asking. So I don't think it's quite as simple as that. But given at the same time the fact that mining for me is the poster child of a capitalist system. If you, when you think of capitalism, I think of mining, and it is true in a sense that capitalism stands at the back of the exploitation of nature, the extraction of minerals from it. That is the core of a capitalist system. And here you have it within the definition of turning minerals and materials into a commodity, and that is what it stands for. So from a general perspective, from just saying yes or no, I would say no at a first glance, but of course we need to unpack it a bit further.
Perfect. Hamish, I can imagine that you come at it, or your experience with the mining sector is a bit more from the engineering side. So what's your view on the mining sector?
I think of what comes to mind with mining, it's sort of the instant images. I think of a hole or pit or dirt, or also gold, valuable things coming out of the ground. I generally think of it on a big scale. But the impression that comes to mind is generally negative, and one where you imagine people covered in dirt, you imagine exploitation, you imagine displaced communities, especially, imagine the mines in Western Germany or in some of the ones in Canada, etc. So that's what immediately comes to mind if I think of mining.
So more bad than good.
Yeah, and also there is the resource curse, of course, as someone who's interested in international development. It's there's often a relationship that people see between a high resource, actual resource-rich country, and levels of corruption, exploitation, and poor public services. However, on a personal level, if I think about it, I'm benefiting hugely from mining. I live in Norway now and benefiting from free education and a very robust welfare state that's built on the extraction of natural resources. So from a personal level, I'm benefiting, but from a global level, I think about it, negative immediately come to mind.
And Maria, what about you? Good or bad?
Oh, well, I think that's quite an arbitrary decision to make. But, I think about as a kid, I'm a real urban slum area growing up, so my only real thought towards it as a kid was the miners' strikes. So, pain. And then, hearing about, poor developing countries that seem to have been robbed of their resources, which I think is what Lenza was on about, being made aware of that. And then I think in the early 2000s, I had an encounter with a mining company who had taken over a disused mine on the site of a former concentration camp. I did some mediation work around that. And now most recently, this mountaintop removal. So I think it's not good or bad. The word that comes to mind is human pain.
Mm-hmm.
Pain.
And you've touched on so many of the negative environmental, social issues. Yet I remember a bumper sticker in the first office I worked in that said, if it's not grown, it's mined. And I had never reflected on this before, but it helps maybe showing mining in a different light, particularly if we consider all the minerals and metals needed to fuel the ongoing energy transition. So do you feel globally that mining could be part of the solution, or is it only just a problem? What about you, Lenza? What's your reactions to this?
You see, it is very much hard to have these conversations about whether it be responsible mining, which, to be quite frank, I don't even know what that means, responsible mining. Who are you responsible for? And you are responsible for the economical system, particularly mining. So when you're having these conversations, it is within the context of an already existing paradigm prism of a capitalist system. So when you're even talking about, you're correct, if it is not growing, it's mining it. But what are you mining it for? And you're mining it to fuel an existing system, a capitalist system, a profit and accumulation greed system that is actually favoring a group of people and actually hurting the others. And so it is very much important to ask this question of, if we are talking this whole conversation, we can't go beyond or further without actually daring to question and challenge what value means, unless we create a system, an economical system, where value is defined way beyond an exchange value. And excuse me, I'm currently reading Marxist, so my things might be a lot of Marxist because that's the latest book I'm reading. But this exchange and use value, if we actually start creating an economical system where monetary values are not the only way the human existence is based upon, then you will find out that maybe besides growing, there might be other methods to continue surviving on this planet Earth, or actually build a responsible mining with the correct definition of value, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Maria, what are your thoughts on this? A problem or a solution? Is it part of the problem, part of the solution?
So I'm sitting kind of where in some of what I heard Lenza say, which is it depends at which level you want to address this, because there is a huge philosophical level, a huge level about who are we, why are we on this planet, what is our role. And interestingly, in contrast to the people I met in Boone County in March, I spent most of March with a Native American tribe, learning, sharing and learning. And so, there's a whole nother way of being together around, we're stewards. There's no such thing as ownership. Things don't belong to us. So, do you want to have the conversation at that level? And then, but if you try to have the conversation at that level, is it going to overwhelm? Because, the fact I can't say good, bad, problem, not. I'm sitting here on a bloody computer and I'm not giving it up tomorrow. So I'm part of the problem. Every one of us is part of the problem. Whether we got indoctrinated into it, whether we were just blind and unaware, whether we weren't educated, we're all part of the problem. How do we want to row ourselves out of it? But then I look at, then there's the things like when a company wants to do something and it's going to affect a community, then how do we have those conversations instead of immediately creating sides? What is the level of education to be able to bring people into a powerful dialogue, to be able to find consent? Or are you coming into that dialogue with a single-minded purpose just to knock some people over? So for me, the measurement, I don't look at things as being right or wrong. There is only one measurement. What is the injury, loss or harm, or potential for injury, loss or harm that we will visit on others, on ourselves and on our system by what we are intending to do? And if you can actually have that conversation in any setting, then you begin to be able to figure out ways. And I think what touches me as an old fogey that kind of got caught up in this consumerism thing and is having a terrible time with it, is I'm seeing a much younger generation who actually care. They're actually asking these questions. And so for me, it's like, how do we encourage that? How do we bring that up the ranks? How do we say, actually, all professional training, if you want to be an engineer or a doctor or, a tree surgeon, it doesn't matter. How do we incorporate into professional training our values around our common humanity? Because if that isn't in there, then you're doing a job at any cost. So that's, sorry, I don't know if that was a bit of a rant, but.
Perfect. Hamish, you are the younger generation, right? So do you think that your generation has a different view on mining and different expectations perhaps on the mining sector?
Well, yeah, to answer your question quickly, is mining part of the solution? I'd say definitely yes. But I completely reflect what Maria and Longterm have been saying, in that mining's a subset of, you can't talk about mining without talking about politics or values, I think. And if one person's value is economic, another person's value is the intrinsic, even spiritual value of nature, then you have a problem there that can only be resolved through some form of communication, which maybe Maria would facilitate. But ultimately, the reality in the world is we have a capitalist system where we have ownership of capital. It's being converted to other purposes, generally for economic profit for someone. And in development, we like to talk about people's livelihoods, or what resources they have available and how can they convert them to useful livelihood outcomes. How can they use it to achieve the sort of a meaningful life that they want to achieve? And whereas mining is kind of looking at a much bigger scale of kind of, on average, smaller numbers of people controlling larger stocks of resources. So if your value starts from capitalism, for example, is that no one should own resources, that everyone is custodian of resources, then we've got a big problem with mining, because it's all about ownership in general. Therefore, things need to change. If you subscribe to a capitalist system and you think that ownership is the way for the economy to run, the way for the world to run, then we have a system where there's a small number of people potentially benefiting from those outcomes. So I think the young generation is perhaps concerned with these more bigger questions of politics and capitalism and how money fits into them, rather necessarily than mining as the problem.
We have a comment here in the chat function saying, no society, capitalist society, socialist, communist, in the past, present, and probably the future has ever functioned without mining. Keith, I'm going to give you a chance to answer the same question. Is mining part of the problem or the solution?
Thank you. I'd like to contrast what's been said so far. As a society, it's essential. We can't take clean water to people without iron pipes. We wouldn't have healthcare. We wouldn't be having this discussion now on how to improve things. So I'd like to focus more on the positive side. It's essential. And that then reframes the question, good or bad, into a choice of society. We can choose to emphasize the good, and we can choose to minimize the bad. And I think that goes back to what's been said this morning on risk management stages and all the assessments and data collection. That's all about managing the bad, focusing on the good so that we do get it, because at the end of the day, it's essential. I agree with the comment there that the societies, we couldn't function without mining, and it's now this ESG movement is very right in time. We've got to actually now make the good bigger than the bad. Thank you.
You may have all heard of something called NIMBY, which is not my backyard, don't build stuff in my backyard. And the next level that we hear about now is banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. The truth is nobody really likes a hole in the ground, and local communities are no exception, but we do still need the minerals and metals, as we've heard, and we like them in our phones, in our computers to facilitate things like this. How can we improve our relationship with mining? And you have already talked about that a little bit, Maria. Would you like to expand a little bit more on it?
Yeah, I think that improving the relationship is based on, so I'm totally agreeing, we are not going to change the way we live overnight or perhaps even in the next 100 years. So we need to say, you know, what's the raw material we're working with in our humanity? So we need to start there. And for me, it's what is the injury, loss or harm? So, you know, the power of the dialogue and helping people make informed choices and being willing to have certain tolerances for change. Because, you know, what I think about is when I look at that mountaintop removal, the enormous wound in Mother Earth that you can see. They do helicopter rides over it, you know, that enormous wound that so easily could have been tidied up, left in some kind of better ecological state. There could have been so much more that was done after the mining industry left and took everything with them, including jobs, shops. You know, that it's like, well, okay, we are going to come in and do something, and how are we going to leave you after it's done? And that, for me, it's the power of those conversations and listening to the voices. Because one of the things I can tell you out of over 20 years of doing this work is when you get to what I call the real conversation, people will find a way to cooperate and collaborate.
Mm. Someone in the chat function here, Norman, he asks, can any of the panelists make reference to where or when they have observed more effective outreach or collaboration efforts by mining companies? Lensa, have you seen anything that has been a positive effort or positive collaboration from the mining company side?
Right. So I too lived in Norway, and Norway, actually, they're very much strict about which places they're going to mine. And of course, they're socialist democratic country. And just to also reference to the comment that was made earlier, no society has ever existed without the mining. It's not necessarily the mining itself that we have an issue with. It is the context in which it happens. Where does it happen? To which communities does it happen? What land is this taking place? And what are the long-term impacts? But more than any of that is the question of what is your relationship with nature as a society? Will mining enhance our relationship with nature, or will it compromise it? And Norway consciously, I think, more so than any other country, has asked that question and are trying very much their best, at least policy-wise, in guiding which places to mine, actually allowing the communities to be participating in the decision-making process. You know, it is not what is it? They're not just going to go to a given community and say, oh, we're going to mine this area for whatever purpose, and you have to accept it or whatever. They actually involve the community members of what is going to happen, what are the costs, what is the pros and the cons, and they allow the people to participate in that. But also in the process, because Norway respects nature more so than most communities I have witnessed, it's not only the people that they give regards to itself, it is the nature, the land itself. And they actually, I forgot their company name, but they outsource and they actually mine in some parts of the African countries, one in Tanzania and another in Zimbabwe, because land in this particular regions of the African region is where you bury your ancestors. You know, it is the most sacred thing you can think of. So just to go and actually dig it is the most disrespectful thing you can do to the community, which will be a very foreign idea to most Westerners. You know, for them, value is embedded within that any amount of money you give them. So when they asked them, because they needed that resource, when they actually told them, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is what's going to be the outcome of it, and what Maria just brought in, we are going to leave your land in this condition after we actually took out these resources, acknowledging what they have done. And I was very much impressed by that whole process of it. So it is the context I have the issue with. It is the process I have a problem with, and not necessarily the mining aspect of it itself. Why are you doing it? Is it necessary for you to mine all these resources for somebody's greed? You know, I have yet to meet, yes, in every society, like he pointed out, we do mining, but I have yet to meet a person that is a socialist mining investor. You know, you won't meet them. Like, where are they? Introduce me if they exist. And so I think it is from that perspective I have seen good things being done from the mining industry.
As a Swede, I become very competitive when you say that Norway are doing well in this. So
I think they're doing much better than any other communities I've witnessed so far.
Great, thank you. Keith, is it more about how it's being done than that is actually being done? Do you think that that is the issue that people have with mining?
Yes, I think one of the things that we're not giving appreciation to is the long-term investment in mining. It's not something they can set up and collapse over a year or so, but social attitudes can change. So getting back to the core question, what can miners do to actually improve this situation? I think Maria hit it on the head. If they rebalance their accounts to invest more in the recovery of the land afterwards, then they can actually rebuild their position with society and show themselves to be answering this question of the ESG, I think. They can't, you know, these mines established for like 40 years and they've got to get a return back on that. What actually got us into doing that report with Satala in the first place was this concept of stranded assets. The company invests for 40 years, society changes its attitude, and that investment can't be recouped. And I think that's very much a position mining finds itself in. So that it's quick fix is the wrong term, but a quicker fix is for them to shift some of the revenues they're earning in the life of the mine into that area of closing. And I'm minded by that presentation we saw earlier with the graphics on the screen showing good recovery and bad recovery. And I think really that's one of the big things society should be expecting the mining industry to do. Thank you.
The mine closure is a theme that keeps coming up. Are you listening, the mining industry? This is what you need to focus on. Hamish, do you agree with the example of Norway? Are they doing well in terms of their relationship with the communities?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think Sweden wanted to have a share of the oil wealth in Norway back in the 70s in exchange for Volvo, but it never quite worked out, sadly. I definitely agree about the sentiment in Norway. But to address also your question about NIMBYs, I think this really hits the nail on the head, because I agree with the person asking a question that mining supports society as we know it. But we have kind of global flows of resources, but not global flows of responsibility. And I think actually, this may be jumping the question a bit to some of the further ones, but I think people do care about what they do, what they consume in society, but they don't have the information to make good decisions right now. And also who is accountable for ensuring that resources are used responsibly. And I think ultimately that has to come from government. I think private sector can't fully provide that. And to provide a practical example of land rehabilitation, I think a system where if you require private capital to exploit a resource, there could be a sort of insurance pot that's held aside and I guess curated by government, some kind of government agency, to ensure that money is used to fully offset any local environmental damage and then restore it and rebuild natural value afterwards, hopefully. And I think if that's going to connect it to what consumers would expect, if people can see this is happening and someone can be held accountable for that, then there's a possibility for mining to ultimately be responsible and contribute to a better world.
Fantastic. And the theme of this conference is responsible raw materials. As non-mining specialists, what would you say responsible raw materials are? Or maybe let me put it like this. What would you choose as the most critical dimension to consider when we think responsible materials? I think, Lensa, you kind of touched upon this, but let me start with you.
Right. I mean, I think that was one of the things that fascinated me with this conference as well, is this raw mining, or particularly this responsible raw materials within the context of mining. And I asked the question earlier, when you say responsible, who are you responsible for? And the mining industry, first and foremost, as we know it, yes, there are so many policies. Yes, we have lots of conferences. Yes, there are papers. But in reality, what it is mostly responsible for is the economic value it brings. It is that, again, the translation of the profit aspect of it. And while you are actually prioritizing that, to actually, if that is your priority, then the way you go about it will also be different. Let's say if we say the industry is now responsible for nature, the industry is responsible for the communities, you know what I mean. And so now you are asking a much bigger question that is posing not only the mining industry, but also other sectors as well, which is redefining value, right? And so this idea of responsible raw materials in the process of mining, I don't quite get it. While we are actually talking about mining having the definition we know it to have, changing minerals into a commodity. You know, if you are changing it into a commodity, you're actually bending down to a capitalist system, which it is an immoral system. It does not have a particular moral that puts it, that prioritizes other aspects. So I guess I'm a bit confused by the term itself, but I'd be very curious to hear what the other panelists will say.
Yeah, Hamish, what do you think of when you think of responsible raw materials?
I guess the responsibility is diverse. It's responsibility for society, especially the most vulnerable in society. It's responsibility for the natural world, and also responsibility for future generations. The kind of issue is in our sort of global society is that people don't have a chance to kind of express what they need, and people have a chance to recognize what other people need in the global society because of imbalances of power and the way people participate in society. So I think the crux is people understanding how can they be responsible for all these elements, particularly the future generations, in a fair way. And I think in a purely capitalist system, that's not going to happen. So that's where you need to have ultimately governance and government to come in.
Keith, what would your definition be, responsible raw materials?
Well, the title of this session is Bursting the Bubble. I'd very much like to do that and raise it up and say that this has got to be a partnership between the mining industry, society and governments. Because I would say responsible materials has got to incorporate the whole supply chain and society. So it would be irresponsible to dig gold out of the earth, to use it in electronics, only for that to end up in landfill. Now, you can't put the landfill on the doorstep of the miners. That's a bigger societal problem. So you've got to look at the whole supply chain. So I would wrap into that the whole idea of recovering these materials and reusing these materials on the supply chain level and on the social level. Really agree with what's being said here now. You know, the whole area around licensing mines and licensing the use of materials for the benefit of society and not the harm of society, I think is a societal and a governmental thing. So I think this is a really big question, responsible for materials. Thank you.
Maria, is it an oxymoron, this responsible raw materials?
No, I mean, look, we're all on the earth. I'm not going to go into some philosophical conversation about why we're here and what's the meaning of life. We are where we are. And for me, the idea of responsibility at its minimum, and its absolute minimum, I'm repeating myself again, is a responsibility on all of us to ask what is the actual or potential for injury, loss or harm, and how do I mitigate that? That's a minimum. Then above that, asking what could be the intended or unintended consequences of what I'm about to do, and how do I mitigate that? And then when you want to get up a level, the real question, which I know sounds really fluffy, but it's got real content in it, is, am I making life more wonderful for myself and others? And for me, it's those 3 levels, and you choose where you want to be on that. And if you fall below it, you're creating injury, loss or harm. Expect people to be annoyed with you. Expect people to be angry.
Lensa, we're going to go full circle with you. Did anything new come to mind when you heard all these other panelists?
Yes, I mean, rather my heart, it breaks my heart, I think, because I attend a lot of sustainable things, and what Maria just pointed out of this question are very big questions of what I am doing. Does it bring value to people? You know, am I making a wonderful change? But what a luxury question to ask. What a privileged question to ask. You know, if you actually have to put some food on the table, you will sell your land, you will mine it. You know, your labor will be very inconsequential to what Apple makes, you know, using all its resources from African regions or other developing regions in Asia, what have you. So the question or my message will be, I dare for the mining sector people to have this conversation, not for the sake of it, but to dare play havoc with the capitalist system. There is really no point in discussing all these things. It ends up sounding, like Maria just pointed out, just fluffy, because at the end of the day, what we will prioritize as a value will be the monetary value of it. If that is not redefined, really, it's just a meeting we're having right now. And so this is a much bigger question where it poses on every sector, but especially the mining sector. If they dare take that lead, I think we will start creating a much better economic system where asking these wonderful questions will not become just for the privileged and the luxury ones.
I mean, time is just flying by. We are getting to the end of this panel session, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, and I really felt like we did burst the bubble here. To close, if you could pass on one message or request to the global mining industry, what would that be? And I'm going to go around so that you all can get an opportunity. But Keith, let me start with you.
Focus on mine closure and open up dialogue with governments and society about how they can take this further.
Maria?
I think for me, it's something about that what's at stake are human relationships, whether that's within the workplace, whether that's that miner who has to put food on the table. There are human relationships at stake, and you are never, ever going to be able to work with human relationships if you're stuck behind a computer screen looking at Excel spreadsheets and dehumanizing and doing things and making decisions like the people are over there and you never actually really meet them and talk to them and look them in the eye.
Lensa, what about you?
Yes, I think my last message for the mining industry as a whole, or the experts, would be to redefine their relationship with the nature, to make it much more intimate. I think if the industry becomes an ally of nature instead of exploiting it, then what we take it, like what Keith mentioned when he says close it, the way I see it is in a way give it back. But it requires that in-depth relationship with your land, with your nature, with your community, with your environment. And so I think to put a heart in the industry, put the heart back into the industry, and that will be my last message.
Wonderful. Hamish, last word goes to you.
My final word would probably be to the mining companies would be the global community, especially the young community, cares about value and cares about people's different values. And they will be held accountable if they don't hold themselves accountable. So reconsider what you define as value and what other people's values are.
Excellent. Wonderful, wonderful panel session. And thank you so much here from the chat. I can just reiterate this. Thank you to the panelists for a very open and honest discussion about perceptions of mining. So a wonderful thank you to you, all of you, and have a great day.